Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're going to take a look at a banging motherboard for those of you looking to put together a cost-effective AM5 system. This is the Gigabyte B650 Gaming X AX V2. Now the V2 version has a upgraded VRM and also potentially will have slightly different Wi-Fi connectivity depending on your region and also when and where the board has been made. Other than that, this board at the moment comes in around about £140 here in the UK, which makes it a really top contender for that kind of mid-range build. So the first question out of the way, what is the difference between the V2 and the normal version? Well, like I basically said already, this has an increased VRM, so we're looking at an 8+2+2 configuration, whereas the previous version was 8+2+1, which is not really a great deal. And also the fact that we do have slightly different options when it comes to the onboard Wi-Fi 6E. Now the first version came with the dedicated Realtek RTL 8852 CE edition. This board potentially can come with it as well, or potentially, due to manufacturing constraints, you may find that this board will be enabled with an AMD RZ616 model, or potentially you might end up with an Intel AX210. Either way, all of them got exactly the same specifications, all of them do Wi-Fi 6E, and all of them do Bluetooth 5.3. So you shouldn't have any issues there, it's just there are going to be some slight differences, so hence why they've, I guess, called it the V2 version. Also with the V2, because it being a newer revision, comes with a lot more processors supported straight out of the box. All of the 7000 series X3D processors supported straight away from day one release, and some of the 9000 series as well. Again, depending on when you're buying the board, your options may vary. It does come with a BIOS flashback button, so if your BIOS isn't up to date enough for the latest processor you've decided to buy, isn't a problem, you can flash it very easily. We've done a video on that already, which I'll link in the video description. So with all that out of the way, in today's video, just to let you know what's going on, so we'll be doing a unboxing, going through the packaging, see what we get, look at the box, specifications, etc. Do a tour of the motherboard, so you can see all the ports and what potential connectivity you've got. We'll also discuss some of the pros and some of the cons and some of the basically downright weird things which Gigabyte have chosen to include on this board and some of the things which they've chosen to omit. And hopefully at the end of the video you should have a better or more informed decision when you come to actually making a purchase. So with all that said, let's get straight into it. First of all, looking at the box itself, as you can see, this is the B650 Gaming X AX V2, based around the B650 chipset, if that isn't already obvious. So support for AM5 processors only, not AM4. People still ask me that for some reason, but yeah, it's AM5 only. Supports 7000, 8000 and 9000 series processors at the time of recording, which is February 2025. On the back of the box it goes over some of the key features, so we'll quickly go over those. So it's got a fully covered MOSFET heatsink and M.2 thermal guard. Basically, it's got a ton of heatsinks. Also, you've got the 8+2+2 phase digital VRM solution. Also, you've got the fast 2.5 gigabit Ethernet LAN, which is also backwards compatible with 1 gig and 10100, etc. And also the inclusion of Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3. Also on the box, it gives you some of the specifications and also a layout of the rear I/O and some handy QR codes for you to ignore. Although potentially you might want to take advantage of QR codes, although I detest them. But if you want a user manual, then you're going to have to either go to the website or scan the QR codes. All you get included in terms of kind of information is a very basic guide and a multilingual installation guide, which is kind of generic, so kind of pointless really, but I guess it's in there. Something which is actually quite useful, you do get a pair of SATA cables, so if you are using some older mechanical disks or maybe you've got some SSDs that are still on SATA, you get 2 cables included. And you also get 2 of the Wi-Fi antenna for the integrated Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Don't forget, if you do want to use Bluetooth, you will have to connect these up. Bluetooth does need an antenna, believe it or not, so those will be quite handy. You also get 3 screws as well for attaching M.2s to the 3 M.2 slots on the board itself. I've already put those into place on my board so they don't go missing, because they generally tend to for some reason in this household. But anyway, that's another story altogether. So that leaves us pretty much with the board itself. So taking a look at the board, one of the things you're going to notice straight away when you get this is the fact that it's really heavy. Most of that is down to the fact that we've got this humongous heatsink over the main VRM portion, and also the additional phases as well are nicely well covered. The heat sinks are nicely thinned as well, so they should do a particularly good job at keeping the VRMs nice and cool, regardless of what processor you're putting on here. Now obviously this is somewhat of a kind of mid-range motherboard based in this sort of price point of about £140 here in the UK at the time of recording, again February 2025. Prices may change, links will be in the video description. But yeah, for £140 you get a heck of a lot of board here, and also a heck of a lot of cooling. Also you get M.2 coolers on this top slot, and also the lower two slots as well, so it's nice that all the slots are covered, and also you get a heatsink over the B650 chipset. In terms of connectivity, we'll start at the top here. So we've got an 8-pin EPS and also a 4-pin supplementary, so you can get a little bit of extra juice. Obviously, would be nice to have two 8-pins, but this board is kind of a little bit lower tier, so it's not really aimed at those really high TDP processors. Moving along from there, so we've got some fan connections here. So you've got your CPU, CPU Ops, and AIO. So 3 fan headers there, all PWM. You can do DC control as well if you want to, or set a static speed. More on that another time, I think. Moving across from there, so we've got 3 RGB connectors all in this top corner. So you've got 12-volt RGB, and also you've got the 5-volt 3-pin addressable RGB, which pretty much everyone will be using by now. Just across from there, so we've got our RAM slots. Now, depending on when you're watching this, the RAM compatibility may be much better. It may be much bigger as well. So at the moment, you're looking at 64 gig sticks. So you can put 4 64 gig sticks on here if you really wanted to. Realistically, I don't think many people will, and also when you do add in 4 sticks of RAM, you do get slower speeds because of the memory controller. Ryzen still isn't quite there for that, but realistically, yeah, if you want to put any RAM in here, it will support up to around about 8,000 megatransfers per second, but your mileage will definitely vary on that. Ideally, I would stick to maybe 6,000 for 7,000 and 8,000 Ryzen. For 9,000 Ryzen, you might be able to get up to 6,400. Those are getting a little bit better, but around about 6,000 megatransfers is what you want to be aiming for ideally. Moving across from there, so we've got our 24-pin main power connector, and underneath that, it's where it starts getting a little bit weird and wonderful. So there is actually a reset pin header, and next to that, there is a physical reset switch. Now, I don't really know why that is there. Surely it would have made more sense for something like a power button or maybe a CMOS reset button, but no, it's a reset button. Don't know why, but yeah, weird and wonderful. I guess it's nice that it's there. If you've got a use for it, let me know in the comments. I'll be glad to hear what your thoughts are on that. I think that's possibly a missed opportunity for something else. But anyway, underneath that, another PWM header. And also just across from that, you've got the 4 diagnostic LEDs. So those light up to tell you if there's a problem with your system. So it'll cycle through, it'll start off CPU, then RAM, then VGA, then boot. If any of those lights stay on, then potentially you've got a problem. If they all extinguish, then everything's A-OK. Moving down from that, we've got our USB Type-C front panel connector. This one is actually the fastest one on the entire board. So this one is up to USB 3.2 2x2, so up to 20 gigabits per second for your front panel connector. So if you're plugging in things like your mobile phone or fast disk drives, you want to transfer some files, then that is the ideal port to do so on. Moving down from that, B650 chipset, again with the big heatsink on there. And further down, we've got 4 SATA ports on there if you want to use SATA drives. Underneath that, USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, so for your Type A's on the front panel connector. Nicely right angled as well, nice and easy to get access to, and looks nicer for cable management. Before we go along the I/O at the bottom, also we should mention obviously the CPU socket itself, so AM5 sockets for AM5 processors, as we've said already, 7000 series, 8000 series, 9000 series, and potentially what else comes out in the foreseeable and unforeseeable future. There's probably going to be a lot more processors on this platform. It does seem to be aiming for some sort of longevity, which is nice, very much like we did with AM4. So yeah, that's all good. Going back down to the front panel connections, so at the bottom, this is what Gigabyte do best actually. The connectors, everything is nicely labelled up and kind of socketed in there as well, or at least have surrounds, so you can't really put cables in wrong. No doubt somebody will, but this is better than a lot of manufacturers. So you've got your front panel I/O, so that is things like your reset switch, power switch, hard drive LED, power LED, etc., and also things like BIOS bleep speaker if you want to connect up one of those. Above that, our CR2032 BIOS battery, and just to the side of that, a CMOS reset pins. This is excellent placement, it really is. So if you've got your graphics card in here, if you've got your BIOS battery over here, or your CMOS reset sort of tucked away, it's a pain. You have to take your graphics card out. At least with this, it's all the way on the far side, so you should have pretty easy access to it, which can be quite handy if some OC goes wrong, that type of thing. Good choice there, I think. Next up, 4-pin PWM connector. For those of you wondering, only 5 PWM fan headers on this board in total, which I think is a little bit on the low side, to be honest with you. I would like to have seen kind of maybe 6 as a minimum, but modern system these days, you can use things like splitters and hubs, etc. So it isn't a problem, but just I would have rather seen a few more fan headers rather than having the reset button maybe. Moving across from the PWM connector, so we've got 2 USB 2.0 headers, so good for things like Corsair commanders and other USB peripherals on the USB 2.0 ports. Then you have got a COM port header, so if you want to install a serial port, you can do. Next to that, you've got a couple of TPM headers, so for installing additional TPM devices. Next up, we've got another addressable RGB header, so 3-pin 5 volts and also 4-pin 12 volts as well. And finally along the end there, we've got our front panel audio connection for the onboard Realtek ALC 897 or possibly 893. You may get one or the other depending what is available at the factory. Those are pretty much interchangeable. There's no real perceivable difference between the two chipsets. Both will provide you 7.1 surround sound, although with the jacks on here, you've only got 3 jacks on the back, so you have to kind of tie up the jacks from the front and the back, which isn't always ideal, but I don't really think anyone actually uses 7.1 surround sound, at least on analog these days. If you do, let me know. I'd be very interested to hear. So that is the I/O out of the way. Let's take a look at the connectivity in terms of PCI Express and also M.2s. So M.2 we'll start off with. So top slot, PCI Express Gen 5 x4. Nice to see, and also there is an integrated heatsink as well. Nice and easy to remove. One thing which they have omitted on here, which I would like to have seen, is some kind of quick release clasp for putting M.2 drives in. With this, you still have to use the screws to install the drives, which is a little bit kind of retro these days, but certainly it's absolutely fine. I would rather it cost less as a motherboard and have to do a little bit of manual labor myself. I think that makes sense in the long run. Other M.2 slots, so underneath here we've got PCI Express Gen 4 x4 on both slots. Top one is from the CPU, bottom one is from the chipset. Again, same deal, no quick release on those, you'll have to screw them in manually. But the heatsinks themselves, nice, decent, sturdy bits of metal, should keep your drives nice and cool. So now let's take a look at the PCI Express slots. So top slot, PCI Express Gen 4, unfortunately, not Gen 5, so Gen 4 x 16. You do have the enlarged clasp there as well, to make removal and insertion of GPUs a little bit easier. That is a welcome addition, definitely. Moving down towards the bottom there, so we've got 2 more full-size slots. Unfortunately, these are only PCI Express Gen 3 x 1 in terms of their wiring, so not really ideal. I'd have liked to have seen maybe just one slot and be PCI Express Gen 4 x 2 or by 4. Anything would be better, I think, than PCI Express Gen 3 x 1. There are some capture cards which will take advantage of that, but I think, again, slightly missed opportunity there. One slot would have been more than adequate. Most people only need one. It's very rare you'll use 2 PCI Express expansion devices, and being Gen 3 x 1 is a little bit on the poor side, but most people are going to be buying this just to put together a kind of really cheap and effective gaming PC, in which case, realistically, you're just going to be using your graphics card slot, so I don't think that's a problem at all. So that's pretty much it for the board itself. Let's take a look at our rear I/O. So in terms of rear I/O, we've got 2 USB 2.0 ports, underneath that a PS2 port, which probably no one will use these days, but it's there anyway. Next to that, you've got your SMA connectors for your onboard Wi-Fi, which is the Wi-Fi 6E and also Bluetooth connectivity. Next to that, we've got an HDMI port and also a display port. Now, the display port will do up to 4K 144 Hz. The HDMI will only do 4K 60, which is a little bit of a shame, but certainly for onboard graphics, I think that's going to be absolutely fine for most people, or for connecting up an additional display supplementary to your dedicated GPU. Next up, so we've got some USB ports there. So the BOS flashback port is the white color-coded one at the bottom there. That one is actually USB 2.0, for those of you who are wondering. The slot above is USB 3.2 Gen 1, so that's 5 gigabit per second, color-coded in blue. Moving across, we've got some faster ports here. So this is going to be USB 3.2 Gen 2, so these are 10 gigabit per second ports, Type A and also a Type C. Next up, there is a little viewing hole there for the USB flashback button and also the USB flashback button itself. Next up, we've got another 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, so color-coded blue. And above that, we've got our Realtek RTL 8125G 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, which is absolutely fine and also backwards compatible with gigabit and 10100 should you be using slightly older standards. And last but not least, we've got our audio jacks. So we've got the usual stuff there, color-coded, so green, blue and pink. Green for headphones, blue for line and pink for microphone, that sort of thing. So overall, I think you've got pretty much most of the bases covered there. There's a reasonable amount of USBs. You've also got your connectivity in a pretty decent spot. So if your motherboard is kind of upright, as it would be in most computers, your antennas will be facing upwards. So you're only realistically going to be blocking a couple of USB 2 ports on the top and maybe an old keyboard port. The rest of it is going to be completely unobstructed, which is excellent. I do prefer to see the ports towards the top there rather than being towards the bottom. So yeah, nice layout and design. And I think overall the board itself, in terms of its general aesthetic, is actually quite muted. You could put this into a kind of business or workstation type PC and don't think anyone would bat an eyelid. And also likewise, if you put it into a gaming PC, you've got all those kind of gaming niceties, such as your RGB headers, etc. And also the kind of enlarged heat sinks to make it look pretty inside of your build. So I think that's going to pretty much wrap things up for taking a look at the Gigabyte B650 Gaming X AX V2. I think it's definitely a worthwhile upgrade, a little bit better VRM. You also got options there for your onboard Wi-Fi as well, which is nice. You're not kind of stuck on Realtek. You might have Intel, you might have the AMD version. I actually quite like the AMD chip, the AMD RZ616. I've had it in a few boards now and it does a pretty decent job. So yeah, overall, nice board. It's got some nice features on there. It's got some slightly questionable ones, such as the PCI Express slots and also the reset button, which I don't think anyone's realistically going to ever use. But again, let me know in the comments if you would. Personally, like I said, I'd like to see maybe another PWM port there and possibly having those two slots combined into one PCI Express Gen 4. I think that would have been beneficial. Or maybe just a PCI Express Gen 3 x 4 if they could squeeze it in. That would have been quite useful, especially for some of the more modern capture cards. But anyway, I'm whittering on now. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, smash the like button. If you want to see more content like this on a daily basis, maybe consider hitting subscribe and the chime notification. That way you'll be notified of future video releases. But for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To. And hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.